Good evening, and welcome to the Poets Cafe. I'm your host, Isabel Rivera. Tonight, we have a very special guest with us who really needs no introduction. He is one of America's finest poets writing today. He has published numerous literary books on the market. He has won many literary awards and is currently professor of poetry at Cornell University. We welcome A.R. Ammons. Good evening, Professor Ammons, and thank you for being on the Poets Cafe.
Thank you, Isabel. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
How are you tonight?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Oh, very good.
You look radiant as usual.
I have to say, Professor Ammons, we've talked before that this is quite thrilling for me, having been exposed to your poetry at 15.
I didn't know it was that early. I remember meeting you about 4 years ago after a student poetry reading.
Yep, that's right.
Yes.
I came running up to you for your autograph.
But what happened when you were 15?
What happened? I was rummaging through a high school library, and I found editions of poetry.
What high school was that?
Islip High School in Long Island.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Amazing where your poetry ends up, Professor Ammons. Tonight, I'd like to ask you many questions about your poetry.
Very good.
Beginning with a beautiful poem that I encountered in the latest edition of Poetry Magazine, April 1996, A Sense of Now.
Yes.
I find that throughout the years you have celebrated nature in your poems. Would you say this is a continuation of that move?
It's the language is the language of nature, but the concerns are actually fairly metaphysical or philosophical. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I've often...
Just want me to go with that?
Well, I mean, I've often noticed when you just use this word metaphysical.
Yes.
Once I compared you to Neruda in that metaphysical, romantic striving I perceive in your poetry.
Yes.
How would you define this metaphysical feeling you have of the world in your poetry?
These are very difficult questions. I think I have certain basic concerns which I derive from seeing natural phenomena. And then, of course, I talk about the concrete situation in the terms of that situation. Mm-hmm. But usually some more general juxtaposition or conjunction is being brought into mind. And that certainly is what controls this poem, A Sense of Now. Mm-hmm. It's about the past and the future. That is to say that once the events of the past have passed, there's a kind of loss of coherence or significance takes place, and things wind up as a kind of debris, a metaphysical debris, I call it. And that's rather sad, but I'm saying that within that very context, something new is starting, such as a stream is running, learning how, not learning how, but forming itself as it comes down the hill, and a present and a future is being rescued from that debris at all times. So that they're the two motions, of course, of breaking down and building up.
I find this very interesting.
How had you read it?
Well, I find that your poetry concentrates on many things going on at once. Like a poem might center on the biological activities of a bird, and then suddenly this interruption, the bird flies away. It breaks into this shiver of blue, of colors. Here in this poem, again, I see this studying, this detachment, distance of many processes going on at this river, this water source. Then suddenly the otter approaches. This kind of difference between many things going on at once and then suddenly an interruption. How can you account for that?
Well, actually, I think the poem was headed in that direction all the time. There's a kind of clearing going on after the middle of the poem where you have the debris. Then there's a certain taking on of shape until at the end an otter is there drinking from a pool that's almost perfectly clear. I mean, the debris has returned to a nearly pure natural condition of a clear pool.
I find the word debris, I'm not exactly sure what you mean.
That means sediment, fragments, leftovers, when rock, for example, deteriorates into debris.
Working with your analogy before about different motions happening at the same time, past, present, and future,
right.
I often feel that in some poems, in your selected poems, there are different things going on at the same time, different voices speaking, dialogues, shifts in visions. How is this a confusing process when you're dictating all these things that you're
not at all, not for me. Maybe for a reader, but not for me. I see a poem as a kind of theater, in which I am the lyrical speaker, but there are other people or forces present, as in a drama or a play, and I think once you have your mind on the substance of the play itself, then you know your part in it and the other people's part in it as well, and it's pretty easy. Anyway, I'm not sure these things are as much planned as my answer suggests. I think what happens is that you enter into a kind of possibility that you imagine in your mind, and you just go with it. And certain things appear and resolve themselves.
I think that someone once said that poetry is taking something in its most basic form and breaking things into their parts. What would you say to this statement?
Well, it breaks them into their parts, but only to put them back together in some vital way.
I find that that's how you're Whitman-esque in the sense that you may really focus with almost camera-like precision on an animal, on a nature scene. And then suddenly you shift back into this huge universalizing vision, which I think characterizes a sense of humanity in the constantly a tension between close and far.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, the word unit and universal have the same one thing, and each of us is a single person, and yet we're a universal. We represent the human species. At the same time, we're just one, a single person.
And yet, I feel that in person you're very modest. Your poetry gets extremely complex, and yet I have to say that it strikes me that the persona speaking is that of a terrestrial wanderer pondering cosmic space, especially in sphere, the form of emotion.
Yes.
And also in garbage. Could you talk about that? I mean, in the sense of how do you receive your inspiration? This passion for entire encompassing visions. Do you ever feel that you speak for more than yourself?
People tell me that I sometimes do, but no, I've usually pursued a pretty lonely wandering, and have written basically for myself, and usually about matters that are completely unimportant. That is, birds and streams and brooks and stumps and things. I don't deal with important things because we have so many other people writing about those. So I wander around, and for my own amusement and edification, I notice things, and I find that writing about them helps me to capture them and clarify them for myself. As for going all the way towards trying to write one whole poem like such a sphere, I had been concerned with the so-called one-many problem all my life. And then when the image of the Earth began to appear on television from outer space, and you knew you were actually not looking at a globe anymore, but at an actual photograph of the world, it was just so striking how we are little inhabitants altogether here on this little dot in space. And so I tried to write a poem around that single image of the fact that we are units, individuals, and universals at the same time.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was...
So you're saying it was inspired by this entire shift in a viewpoint, looking at the world at that
Well,
distance.
I was prepared for the shift, and when it came, I just sort of made use of it, yes.
If I may read an extract from one of your poems, Garbage, that came out in 1993. You were speaking previously about celebrating things that might seem to others unimportant.
Yes.
Here you're celebrating garbage. Here is the gateway of beginning. Here the portal of renewing change. The bird shit even, melding enrichingly in with debris. Alone for the roots of placenta. Oh, nature, the man on the edge of the cardboard-laced cliff exclaims, that there could be a straightaway from the toxic past into the fusion-lit reaches of a coming time. Our sins are so many, here heaped, shapes given to false matter, hamburger meat left out. In this celebration of garbage, how does your poet's heart feel this inspiration? How do you... What would you say to people who think poets celebrate unimportant things?
Well, for example, in Garbage, I meant to give though I'm not myself religious, I meant to give a religious cast to the entire poem, because, you know, when we die, we go to church, and there are certain celebrations and so forth that transfigure us, presumably, and lead us to paradise and things of that nature. When language breaks down and become boring, poets are supposed to revive it and renew it. And so I think of that the reason I say the garbage heap is the beginning is where the disintegration from the past takes place and it becomes available to a new start. So it's a transfiguration at that point.
I'd like to thank Professor Ammons for talking with us this evening at the Poets Cafe. After a short break, we'll be back with A.R. Ammons on our poetry stage, so please stay tuned.
Since we were just discussing a sense of now, a poem, I'll start with that. Rock frozen and fractured spills, a shambles, and tears of time pile into, shatter through other tears, or angle up oddly, brightly lined with granite or talus, a jumble, metaphysical debris. But the stream, finding its way down a new hill, spills along the right ledges, shifts the schist chips about, and down with becoming coherence, and moss beds down ruffling shale edges dark gray to green, and the otter drinks from side pools almost perfectly clear. The next poem is about picking up storm cast. That is, after a sharp wind has gone through, there are usually things in the yard that need to be picked up. And I was thinking in this poem about the fact that each piece that falls from the tree, depending on how far away from the trunk it falls, and depending on its weight and how fast the wind was at any time, is a kind of equation. So when you go out and pick up the bark or branch from the ground, you're not really picking up a bark or branch, you're picking up an equation, an exact description of how that piece of material got to be there. It's called picking up equations. Not smart to be out under trees where the wind's still this high, billowing and breaking, bringing down stub ends of last year's drought wood that died way up in the branches. And a nick on the noggin could drop you. No one around to see after you or call rescue. Or you could just be dazzled and wander off down the road, wild. Still, don't you like picking up storm cast, swatches of leaves snapped off, bark rippings, to weight the wind's reach each thing gave to, how high it held or hung, what angle brought it down? One thing certain, falls shadow the wind, ellipses sprung, noting downwind to the arc, including everything. I guess what I really like about that is the last idea, that there is some piece that fell farthest, and whatever that arc was from the trunk included all the lesser arcs. So you get to unity of a kind even that way. Okay. This is a little poem called Loving People. This enterprise answers to none of the natural balances, trade-offs, exactions. It doesn't shape to debit and credit differences. People are losing propositions. What they bill flakes away, even when they don't take it with them. No economy of justice, no sparing, no payment for services rendered rolls this circus by. You make up your mind first to do it, rain or shine, giving or taking. You decide to love, and then, here and there, bit by burn, a nod, a touch, smile, the sweet love starts showing up. Let's see. This poem may be a little bit too hard to get right off, but it is about sort of being swept away with too much energy, a kind of manic situation in which you feel in danger of being taken away. And I say that poems allow you to introduce a kind of small form into this passion, and by giving it some shape, you control it enough to get by yourself. It's called Modes Against Too Much. My poems, if poems other than casual entrances into systems, are lulls by which motion going by too fast, as in damaging winds, slows to assumed, forced into the definition of mediating rhythms, sketchy but entangling knots. In this wind, tight patterns obstructive and unyielding, likely to come down or be hauled off whole. Crisscross trellises and typhoons, say. But bits, strings, swerving, lessening and swelling, elongations that giving to the wind like high water or sails, catch a part of it, formed into known ways, let go, withstood. I think it helps to see these poems. And do we have time for a slightly longer one? I think for me. This one is called Collapse Structure, and it's about terror as it comes and goes. Terror, when it goes, leaves lifelessness's big hole. One does not wish it back, terror, fierce inhabitant. A guest abruptly returned from a delayed leaving, there again at the door, so the doorways stir and fly. But how great the vacancy, the attention turning about to no attendant, the polish of absence's gist. There's the first quarter moon, though, its own light emptying out the whole dome, the sight of its loneliness confirming one's own. Just somewhere to look, as if to find absence altogether in one place. Recalling terror, though, may not be the same as terror really gone, for in the recall of suasions of the recently departed is still much to muse on, the bridgeways and slidings to relief, the simmering into assimilation of humiliation and demand. The guest needs now only images, not to be answered or answered to. If terror moves on away through the miles and hours and relief loses focus, tires of dawdling, and feels the first scorch of nothingness, oh, then emptiness's own terror becomes another guest, or the same or just another someday, after long entertainments, to take grateful leave of. This is a poem about some old widow women I used to see walking about town. It's called Marginals. Some of these old widow women around here are roving loners. No matter how deep the snow or bitterly near zero the air, they are elongated out in their boots of a morning and gone. One's high hip spins outward every step, and one's eyes set ahead just above the trees, and one hangs over a slouchy net bag lumpy at the bottom, suggesting she could pack up and off in any direction without regret, unsurprised. One leans into a leaning shoulder, sidelong, as if eyeing the ditch, as if listening with one ear. But I've seen her on both sides of town in a morning. I don't know where they go, probably not out to eat, because they often don't have their teeth in. I don't know what they do. Mostly they just go. It's the motion, going, I think. And going, they rise through high lattices till motion fills with song, their heads fill with sky, and a wind rises in them like ecstasy or death, and their minds made up, they let the earth go. Well, I don't think I have a... Well, I have a 1-minute poem here, I suppose, called Stand-In. A young woman on the bridge tosses rocks of old snow over the rail and leans to watch them streak down into the gorge. All the pleasures of flight with none of the harmful side effects.
I'd like to thank Professor Ammons at this time once again for being with us at the Poets Cafe. I'd like to remind our viewers that next week we will have another very special guest, William Ford, reading his poetry. Until then, please make sure to join us at the Poets Cafe. Good night.